Well, hey, everybody. You're already noticing that this episode of the podcast, it sounds a little bit different. And you've already read the title, no doubt, so you know the content. I just didn't feel like this was fitting for the normal introduction or theatrics. I wanted to go just right into the topic. And you also know that I typically cover baseball and hockey. And this is a basketball story, but you know what? This is a life story. This is actually the story of 9 different lives that were lost on that helicopter in Southern California. And not to diminish any of the other ones because they were all unique. They were likely all special. But everybody's going to focus on the individual that they knew and got to watch grow up. And that was Kobe Bryant. What a day of complete shock. I'm sure nobody's going to forget how they found out or the moment they found out, just the complete shock, top to bottom across a body. And to think about Kobe Bryant, an individual who, has been a little bit removed from the spotlight since retiring from the NBA, but clearly you could see on Sunday how highly he is still thought of. And to see the kind of response generated with his passing, you don't like to see that because it means somebody has met their ultimate fate, but you definitely are taken back by just how many people this one man touched in their lives and in his short 41 years on Earth. I think it was also, difficult to address the way people responded to his daughter's passing. His daughter Gianna was on the helicopter with him. In addition to the other 7 people who were not Bryant's. But that's hard to see. It's hard for anybody to bring up, to include her the right way. Clearly she was, one of Kobe Bryant's most special and prized accomplishments in his life. And people, as they talk about it, as they did talk about it, as they will continue to talk about it on social media and in normal face-to-face conversations, a lot of people are going to, start their conversation by glorifying the basketball career of Kobe Bryant. Or they're going to maybe talk about all the great things that he was just getting into in kind of starting a second lifetime and a second career separate from basketball. And that's all fine. But my immediate thoughts, and especially now as a father, they go out to his family and his closest friends who will definitely forever be impacted by this Sunday. Wanted to quickly share the one time, the story of it that I ran across Kobe Bryant. And this was probably in the early 2000s. It was after a game in Oakland, Lakers and Warriors. And my friend Mike Skloot, colleague, worked with him at KICU, Channel 36. He had known Kobe from covering him in Pennsylvania when Kobe was in high school, right? Went straight from high school to the NBA, and Mike Skloot got to cover that and watch that. And so he caught up with Kobe. Like, they still remained in touch. And in fact, we produced an interview with those two guys from that meeting. But they had about a 10-minute chat, and I was just there for work purposes and to meet Kobe, but I wanted to stay out of the way. And I introduced myself, and he said hi. But the most maybe memorable part of all this is at the end of the conversation, when Mike and Kobe were done, Kobe said goodbye to me by name. And that just always stood out to me for somebody with that much stardom that he had, even at that point, right? He wasn't even at the height of his career yet. But just to remember somebody's name who you knew was kind of a, it was kind of a throwaway meeting, like, oh, here's this guy's friend. Hey, how you doing? I think we all of us kind of fall victim to forgetting somebody's name, or, you're just focused on other things. And he had just played an NBA game and was getting ready, hustling to get on the bus, likely to get back on the team airplane to fly out of Oakland and out of town. So that was my one encounter. And it's also been interesting to see on Twitter and on social media, the one-type encounters that other people had too. Certainly a lot of good ones out there. Now, I know the world goes on, and, I also understand that logistics, it make it pretty impossible to shut down a professional sports league due to things like travel, arrangements, arena dates. It's difficult to move heavy pieces around like that. But I kind of got a weird feeling that the NBA still played its games today. By the way, I'm recording this on a Sunday. I don't know what else they were supposed to do. They were put in a very difficult position. They didn't have a lot of time to react, but I can't imagine that any of the players across the league, I can't imagine where their mindset was. It had to be super hazy. I mean, I know I was discombobulated initially, and it was kind of the response that I saw from a lot of people on social media. They just didn't know what to do with the rest of their day. Like once they found this out, it was like you got to sit down for a second, and even then, it still hadn't sunk in, and we still didn't know the effects and who else was in that helicopter. And now I suppose, and I will address this later on in the podcast, what exactly happened with that helicopter? How did it have some issues, or what were the issues? I will address that last here. But it just had so many people confused. Again, I don't know what the NBA was supposed to do. I don't know what the NFL's Pro Bowl was supposed to do. It just put a lot of people and a lot of professionals in a lot of weird situations, and I think everybody wanted to be the utmost respectful. But I guess hard to satisfy everybody, hard to really address the situation properly. But I know in the coming days and even weeks, we're going to see some pretty awesome tributes to Kobe Bryant. Now, Kobe was 41 years old. Do you think he ever got to live a normal life? And I say normal, he was never going to go have a completely normal life, right? Like he did so well for himself. He has so many connections and opportunities because of basketball. So when I say normal, I guess that has to be graded on a curve, but he spent 20 of his 41 years on earth playing NBA basketball. And he was just starting to get into some other avenues, some creative spaces beyond the basketball world. I thought that was so cool. And I kind of did follow him after basketball was over to see what he would do next, because you could always tell that Kobe was an individual that lived by hard work and loved hard work and dedication. But at the same time, it's also hard to turn that off. If you're a competitive type individual, if you're a grinder type individual like he seemed to be, and when I say that, you're thinking grinder, well, works hard and gets a little bit of result from it. No, he worked really hard and got a lot of result from it. Was he a 17-time All-Star? 2-time Finals MVP? All the titles to go with it. But what I wish most for Kobe and what would have happened is that he would have got to live into his 60s and 70s. And all that hard work wouldn't have been necessary anymore. And I know it comes ingrained in you as a person, but maybe he could have slowed things back a little bit. Maybe he could have enjoyed the fruits of his labor just a little bit more. All right, I also realized that, there are already a lot of questions about what happened with that helicopter. It's kind of an interesting dynamic. I wanted on Twitter today here on Sunday, I wanted to put a couple things out there, and I don't know if it was received well or not. It's too early, right, to maybe even discuss that for a lot of people. And for some people, it's one of the first things. They respect the person, they respect the privacy, they respect the situation, but they're also curious to know how could something like this happen? What was the cause of this? Not to suggest that there was any foul play, right? But it's just a human element of things like this where it puts your mind at a little bit more peace once you can kind of grasp what actually took place. And so for some of you that know, and maybe some of you that don't know, I'm actually a licensed flight instructor. That's kind of my side life that some people know about, but definitely not everybody knows about. Became a private pilot, a commercial pilot, instrument-rated pilot along the way, and then eventually back in 2008, got my flight instructor certificate, which still one of the toughest things you can do in aviation is to get your instructor certification. So airplanes are my thing, and helicopters, for obvious reasons, are different. The way they fly, the controls, the systems, but there are a ton of commonalities in aviation that I was really able to see earlier today when I was able to review the air traffic control recordings. Now they're online, they're public, documented, but I just want to let you know what you're hearing in these recordings are anything that's transmitted over the radio between any airplane and any control tower or any radar facility, like in this case, what they call SoCal Approach or even Los Angeles Center. But it's not, I want to make clear, it's not the recordings of the aircraft. It's the recordings that go over the airwaves of the communication between aircraft and ground facilities, and also potentially aircraft to aircraft. But in this case, the Sikorsky S-76B helicopter, which was registered as November 72 Echo X-ray. It's a very luxurious helicopter, has an impeccable safety record. It is the kind of thing that you would expect Kobe Bryant to be flying in with, maybe 8 other individuals and a pilot. Like it's like the deluxe minivan of the sky. Super comfortable, super accommodating. And it departed Santa Ana Airport, obviously for the basketball activities that Kobe was putting on, and it was going northbound. And the weather in SoCal here today was instrument conditions, meaning that if you're flying at certain altitudes or even at lower levels, you're often in the clouds. Visibility is restricted. They call it instrument conditions. It's the opposite of visual conditions where you can see out the front. You can navigate by ground reference. In instrument conditions, you're navigating by instruments. And you're also flying the aircraft, in this case the helicopter, whether it's pitching up, down, wings level, turning left, right, you're also judging all of that on instruments. And again, this is something that I used to teach, so I never ever want to jump the NTSB here in their investigation. I hate speculation, but I'm trying to provide a little bit of background because I have put some things together in this regard. So the flight was staying under the clouds, which again is very uncommon weather for Los Angeles, even here in January, to have these instrument conditions, the low layer of clouds and the low visibility even below that. But this aircraft was staying in visual conditions. It's special VFR for all you pilots out there. You're familiar with that term. And it was transitioning the airspace of a couple different airports from Santa Ana on its way northwestbound. And it was in communications with different towers along the way. And I know a lot of people saw its flight path due to the radar track, and they saw some figure eights and some circling kind of around the Pasadena area. What that turned out to be was that the helicopter, had to wait outside Burbank's airspace for almost 15 minutes because they didn't have permission to transition that airspace, because during instrument conditions, you can only have one airplane going in or out of the airspace for an airport like Burbank. And the same thing with Van Nuys right next to it. So they had to wait. They did wait their time. And then eventually they got the okay to transition Burbank's airspace, as well as right next to it is Van Nuys Airport airspace. And as they were exiting the Van Nuys airspace, they got handed off to a SoCal Approach controller. Now, when I say handed off, that meant initially the Burbank air traffic controller said, contact Van Nuys Tower. So the helicopter did. And then in talking to Van Nuys Tower, the controller there said, contact SoCal Approach, which is a separate radar facility This is all normal operations, by the way. There's nothing abnormal about anything here so far. But as soon as the helicopter contacted the new controller at SoCal Approach, the radar facility, there was some confusion about who the flight was with their transponder code and where exactly they were. The controller could not see the helicopter on radar because it was below radar coverage. Now, this is also not abnormal. Airplanes have this issue sometimes, whether it's in remote regions of our country or just below ridge lines of hills, or there's dark spots in coverage, kind of like how cell phones don't work everywhere. Radar coverage for aviation doesn't work everywhere, but this was a helicopter. This was especially low, and so that's why it did not show up on radar coverage. And just as they had made contact, the helicopter and the pilot made contact with SoCal Approach, the next thing you know, they had lost communications. So they were never on radar, and then they had a loss of two-way communications. Well, it turns out those were the final moments and or seconds of the flight. And by the way, the weather at Van Nuys Airport during the transition, 2.5 miles of visibility, which to put into context for a lot of you is not tremendous. That's very low visibility for the Los Angeles area. It's also not something that the pilot and or crew should have had extreme difficulty with. You would imagine to get this job and flying for hire and being at least a commercial pilot, if not an air transport pilot certification, that this pilot had a ton of experience. That's what you would come to expect. So 2.5 miles, what I'm saying is it wasn't a perfect day by any means, but it also wasn't an impossible day. It was definitely a difficult day and a 1,100-foot overcast ceiling. Now, I don't know the elevation of impact with the helicopter and the ground, but 1,100 feet is not a very high ceiling. And that means if the helicopter is 600 feet above ground, right, you're talking about 500 feet below the clouds. So, it's a tight margin the way you have it there with an 1,100-foot overcast ceiling. But again, there's been much lower. We've all flown in much lower than that, usually in instrument conditions on an instrument flight, not a visual flight like they were on. But it just paints the picture here that weather played some sort of factor. And again, my full disclaimer and disclosure here is I'm not going to speculate before the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, gets their chance. But weather played some sort of factor here. Either it was CFIT, it's what it's called in the aviation world, controlled flight into terrain, whether that was it and it was just an accident running into the mountain region or the hill region that they just couldn't see because of the clouds. But again, this Sikorsky aircraft, this helicopter, I'd have to double check if this particular model had what's called a ground proximity warning system, but this type of aircraft usually has something that lets you know pretty quickly that terrain is coming up. It gives you a pretty stiff warning when you are anywhere close, and usually 300 to 500 feet near ground surfaces. It has a radar altimeter, sometimes called a radio altimeter, to let you know exactly how many feet above the ground you are. So I think that's going to come out as we know more about this specific aircraft, November 7-2 Echo X-ray. But again, weather had played a factor. I firmly can say that at the very least, whether it was just that simple accident or if there really was some kind of emergency situation with the aircraft itself and they didn't have a lot of time or room to recover. Like I said, they were already flying quite low. And a lot of people have this misconception that the higher you get in flying, the more dangerous it is. Like altitude's a bad thing. Altitude is completely your friend. It buys you more time and it buys you more options. All right, I'm going to end this podcast and just going back to what's really important here and what's the most touching, and that's the loss of Kobe Bryant. And I do not want to forget the other 8 people on this vessel. But Kobe, the one we knew, only about 3 years older than me. I think that's what sets in among the most. A family man, multiple kids. I figured because we were close in age, I'd probably see him become an old man. And instead, it ends here. Still unreal. It's definitely going to take some time to sink in. So, there's not really much more to say that hasn't been said already. I think we're all, kind of in that virtual vigil that happened today here on Sunday, and it's going to continue the rest of the week. People eulogizing Kobe Bryant the best they can. And in the meantime, I'm just going to wish his family and everyone closest to him only the very best.